My name is Saba Fatima, and I'm an assistant professor at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. I did my PhD from State University of New York in Binghamton under Dr. Lisa Tessman. My research interests are contemporary Islamic thought, feminist theory, race theory, and currently non-ideal theory as well. And then a little bit personally about myself, I grew up the first 9 years of my life in Saudi Arabia, and then the next 9 in Pakistan, and since then far longer here, but hopefully permanently settled in Illinois for now. So my first introduction to feminist theory was through Dr. Sherry Stone Mediator at Ohio Wesleyan, where I did my undergrad. And we read The Second Sex, and we also read a text by wives of coal miners in South America who were rallying around improving their living conditions and working conditions. And both of those texts resonated with me in very different ways. And so that's where it all started for me. But as a feminist, I'm most affected by intellectual giants like Gloria Anzaldúa, Maria Lugones, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks. For me, the central concept in feminism that is the concept of intersectionality and social location. I think that as Americans, as American feminists, we have to be able to confront our privilege that we have, and how that privilege impacts women all around the world. So currently, we have invaded and have been at war with Afghanistan for over 13 years, with Iraq for over 11, years and years of sanctions on Iran and Iraq, supported dictatorships, and our foreign policy currently has been under this veil of the phrase of war on terrorism. And so I think as American feminists slash Western feminists, we have to be able to hold ourselves responsible and see our complicitness in oppression of other women who are subject to our social engagement with the world. And for me, those are not separate subjects. They're inseparable. They're intertwined in my identity as a feminist. I think we have to retain this tension that we have, the tension between our privileged social location and our feminist ideals of fighting oppression worldwide, fighting oppression in the lives of all concerned, and that tension, retaining that tension, recognizing that tension is going to serve us better as feminists in being able to recognize how to best fight oppression and how to be unharmful or non-harmful allies, non-toxic allies, hopefully. So that's feminism for me. For me, race theory is a natural counterpart to feminist theory. And in the United States of America, we've had great intellectuals, a history of great Black intellectual thought that have countered brutal oppression both subversively and confrontationally. For me personally, though, the more contemporary thought of Stokely Carmichael within the Black Power movement, Malcolm X within Nation of Islam, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, they have really inspired me and affected me. And I think their unyielding stance in how they fought oppression lent a lot of courage to other rights movements, to the feminist rights movement, to the civil rights movement, to Chicana rights movement, to gay and lesbian rights movements of the 60s and 70s. So I think currently our currently racism has become so obscured within institutions and within the structures of society that it's much harder to point to anything and say, well, that's what racism is. That's racism happening. But I think we hide behind euphemistic language of high crime neighborhoods or just penal justice system or whatever, entitlements. We hide behind these euphemistic phrases, and I think we really have to attune our consciousness to be able to spot those structural forms of oppression in society. And then furthermore, as feminists, as race theorists, as critical race theorists, we have to be able to be humble enough, we have to be epistemically humble to recognize our own complicity in sustaining those structures that ultimately oppress other people. But race theory for me has another component as a Muslim American, because within America and within the Western world, the Muslim identity has also become racialized, surprise, surprise, the body of the Muslim woman has become the site of other people's project within the Muslim world and within the Western world. And I think we as feminists and as race theorists, it is very important to be able to recognize how arbitrary signifiers of the whale or beard or a brown body, and they're truly arbitrary, how those signifiers have come to embody what being Muslim is, and how those identifications then work to oppress people in society. So the article Muslim American Scripts was part of my larger dissertation under Dr. Lisa Tessman, and the larger project was motivated by a specific kind of experience that Muslim Americans have. And I'm not saying that all Muslim Americans experience this, but that it resonates with many Muslim American political experiences, and that is of distrust and disenfranchisement by their own country. And so that was my motivating factor. And amongst my friends and amongst discussions, it appeared that Muslim Americans tended to stay away from issues that would reveal their complex affinities with the world, and that's very frustrating. And loving Maria Lugones' work as much as I do, I saw that as a form of fragmenting oneself, to having to prove our loyalty, our unyielding loyalty to our country at all cost. When in effect it becomes an animation of some sort of patriotic script that you have to keep regurgitating. So yeah, so that was my underlying motivation there. So, who are the trusted sources in our daily lives? Who do we trust to give us a good rundown of things? And while everybody recognizes that the media has bias, we think Fox News is biased or MSNBC is biased or whatever not, in reality, the spectrum of our political opinions is very limited. Not many of us actually look up international newspapers and see how the other sees us. And I think so there are obviously sources that we consider unreliable, because obviously they're going to be biased about how they see us. I mean, they're the enemy. The enemy is going to have a bad opinion of us, right? But what that has ended up meaning in terms of Muslim Americans is that we have become that doubted source. Muslim Americans have become that doubted source. So whatever we have to say about our foreign policy or even our domestic policy as far as it concerns Muslims and their liberties, that has become subject to doubt, because obviously we must have split loyalties at best, and otherwise we obviously have sinister loyalties that we're disguising. And what that does to young Muslim Americans, or to Muslim Americans in general, is that they begin to doubt their own testimony eventually. They begin to see themselves not, like, it's not their place to be giving their view on the war in Iraq, because they don't want to give their biased opinion about something that they might have an affinity for, or sympathy for, or empathy for, and this can be very corrosive, with time. When time and time again, anything you have to say is you're only saying it because of your social location. You're only saying it because of your identity, but that explanation is only applied to your social location and not to the master narrative. The first issue with political apathy is that you're going to have Muslim Americans who are not going to be very interested in aiding the government in their war on terror. So that to me is an instrumental detriment. But the more important aspect of apathy, political apathy, is that there's this desire to disconnect yourself from our country's foreign policy and domestic policy. With that, what happens is that there's no disruption of the master narrative on the war on terror, because you're not engaged in the political process. Epistemic loss is as simple as losing a crucial perspective that would appropriately inform the social or political issue that's under consideration. So the very people that can provide you with the appropriate context, it's like not consulting surgeons for a surgery, or not consulting climate scientists for climate change, right? But having junk scientists give testimony on it. So similarly, losing that important perspective, but not simply just losing an important perspective, but also losing it in virtue of the source that it's coming from, because you have epistemic closure about that particular identity. You already know everything there is to know about them just by looking at their body, by looking at their signifiers that you identify them with. And why that is of importance is because Muslim Americans are in this unique position to be able to understand the narrative and the lived experience of people that they have affinities with. Other than this idea of pan-Islamic identity. I mean, even as heterogeneous as our population is, we have, there's no, there's nothing that unites Muslims in a sense of our bodies or our cultures, or there's phenotypes, nothing that truly unites us. Economic, social values, political alliances, divergences on all issues. But there is this, but Muslim Americans can still provide, can still better understand the lived narratives of lives of people that they are able to place themselves in. They're able to place themselves in those in others' lives, and be able to give a better perspective on those particular issues. To lose that because you consider that testimony disloyal is I think that's a grave loss for U.S. foreign policy. So in terms of cultivating empathy to counter apathy, if we're able to cultivate empathy in our citizens, we'd be able to give a more morally responsive response to any particular social political issue. But I think more importantly for Muslim Americans, or for any minority, it allows us to remain whole. In Maria Lugonis's term, it allows us to remain multiplititious, or in Bernard Williams' terms, it allows us to retain our integrity, our deep sense of commitment. So cultivating that allows us to, in essence, retain our humanity. So in terms of empathy informing, our political response, if you have empathy part of a political discourse, you're gonna get a different set of responses in terms of the kind of solutions that will be offered. Let me give you a sort of non-related example. When we have a white body involved in an incident, we have a completely different discussion and a different set of solutions that are on the table up for discussion, a different plan of action, let's say, than when we have a brown body or a person of color that is involved in an incident. Sometimes we don't even have a discussion because, we just jump the gun, literally. But secondly, so first of all, it really affects the kind of the discourse that's going on, right? It affects the kind of solutions that people offer, let's say in Congress or elsewhere in society, in the media, if you have empathy for the other, right? But then my second claim is that empathy is informing that discourse for the better. That's a better response that is coming to the table. So it's not simply that it's a different response, but that's a more morally adequate response. And in that sense, we are able to think about the everyday lived experience of the other, be able to place ourselves within, how we stand within their political narrative, be able to see that. And so one might wonder, okay, well, what does that do, right? It might be so that a person who has cultivated empathy within a political context, and a person who has not cultivated empathy, they both arrive at the same conclusion: drone strikes, right? Let's say they both say we got a drone strike. That's fine. The idea here is that the fact that this person had cultivated empathy, that empathy acts as a moral obstruction. It acts as a moral hesitancy that this person has in making these hard choices that this person does not have. So while this is a hard, inevitable choice, according to some, to drone strike, let's say, right? There are situations where this person who doesn't have empathy may be more willing to strike when a strike is not needed. In the case of Syria or Iran, I mean, there have been so many instances where we could have responded by military action, and thank God we did not. And I think that requires a moral conscience that you have to keep alive. And in part, you keep that alive by cultivating empathy and by understanding the lives of other people. The article in particular obviously is talking about accessing, for Muslim Americans to access and assess their affective response to what goes on in the Muslim world and what happens to Muslims within this particular country, and to value it as a political response and to value it within a political context. But a larger point, which I do not make in the paper, but that's part of the motivation behind everything, and which I always try to emphasize to my students, is that even though Islam is a comprehensive religion and that it is an all-encompassing way of life, to attribute the social and political engagement of Muslims to something inherent within them, or to attribute their engagement to their religion in particular, is very, very dangerous. It's first of all, it's simplistic. Secondly, it's dangerous because you're not making any effort to understand where that other person is coming from. You're just like, you do that because you're Muslim. You do that because your religion tells you to do it. But thirdly, it's also offensive because it denies the material and historical reality of our lives, of our daily lives, of a history of colonialism, of a history of dictatorships, and so on and so forth. So my hope is that people understand that oftentimes Muslim engagement comes under the cloak of it being Muslim engagement, but that there are social and political underpinnings to why that engagement is taking place the way it is, and to recognize those underpinnings.